I'm talking a lot about this idea of our professional expertise being commoditized. And it's going to be commoditized, and it's already commoditized. And what's going to give you a delta, what's going to give you value when all this is commoditized, if you can understand the bigger picture?
Architecture is often described through its outputs, but what really defines a project is not the output, but the pipeline behind it. A pipeline that takes a sequence of decisions, data, analysis, and collaboration that moves it from an idea, from concept, through to delivery. And today, that pipeline is under pressure. Projects are becoming more complex, more data-driven, more interdisciplinary, yet despite decades of investment in digital tools, many of the same challenges still exist. Fragmented workflows, disconnected systems, and a gap between design intent and what actually gets built. So, the question is no longer just about better tools, it's whether we need to rethink the pipeline itself. My guest today has spent her career working exactly at that intersection. I'm joined by Martha Tsigkari, Senior Partner and Head of Applied Research and Development at Foster & Partners. Martha leads one of the most advanced applied research teams in global architecture, working across computation, performance-driven design, machine learning, simulation and fabrication. Her work focuses on how ideas move through a project, how design analysis and delivery connect, and how we can move from fragmented workflows to something more continuous, more intelligent, and more integrated. Across her career, she has contributed to some of the world's most complex and technically ambitious projects, including the new International Airport Mexico City, the Queen Alia International Airport, and the Zayed National Museum. She's also an associate professor at UCL, helping shape how the next generation of architects think about systems, data, and computation. In this episode, we explore what it really means to reinvent the pipeline, how computation changes the way decisions are made, why integration still breaks down in practice, and what the role of an architect becomes in a more connected system. This is going to be a conversation about how architecture actually moves from idea to reality. Martha, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Been very excited of our off-camera chats to speak to you and have you on.
I thought I would kind of turn you down through our chats, but obviously not.
No, absolutely not. I mean, today I wanted to start a little bit around your work with applied R&D at Foster & Partners and sort of thinking about a different way that architecture comes together, really. So your approach seems to move into the idea of architecture as more of a connected system, linking design, analysis, performance, and delivery. What I wanted to ask you is that thinking it the right way? And how did you start thinking of architecture in this way?
I think, well, it is quite the right way. I think in relation to where things are going, we're thinking more about how we're reinventing the entire pipeline within profession. So the group in and of itself has a wide breadth and depth of expertise. So we started with kind of complex geometries, parametric generative design was our bread and butter 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. But then we very swiftly moved into real-time simulation and interactive applications, extended reality with immersive experiences, both in virtual and augmented reality, a lot around interoperability, connecting seamlessly software together, looking into robotics, smart buildings, Internet of Things, digital twins. We have been also doing quite a lot of work on optimization with genetic algorithms, configurators, performance-driven design applications, and of course, AI and machine learning. And all of these different pieces come together or become their own applications through bespoke tools that we have created. So in every single step of the design process, from conception to operation and beyond, we're kind of trying to think in which ways technology can help us reinvent the way we do things. And that reinvention, that systematic approach, and how to do this in a way that enhances creativity rather than feels like technology is stuck down your throat, requires very careful kind of strategic thinking and how to move forward, which is what we have been doing. And more so now with AI, especially in since 2018 that we've been doing it, we're more and more seeing that it's not even about creating a system, it's about reinventing the system altogether.
Okay. You mentioned interoperability there, right? It's a big discussion point, but in previous podcasts and many of my conversations, we talk about siloed systems, things not being able to communicate and work together. Mm-hmm. How are you overcoming those challenges?
Oh my God, that has been a discussion that has been going on in the industry since I started, right? And so at some point we realized at the office, okay, this is not something that vendors seem to want to solve for themselves, so let's solve it ourselves. So we developed our own bespoke tool called Hermes. For the record, all of our tools have ancient Greek mythological names or what have you. And I have not decided. So it's like, it's not my fault, but I like it. So Hermes is a messenger, and what it does, it can go from software to software, no matter where that software sits, in what part of the world, who's using it, and allows messages to go from one software to the other, where only the elements and the data that you need transfer from one software to the other in real time. So if you're making a change, let's say in a design, and you want that change to be reflected in your structural engineering, we have a way of connecting the two, and every change that you do, you can push directly. The structural engineers sync the change directly within their own software, and they can run their own analysis. So you're bypassing these huge cycles of, I'm doing something, now I need to export it, somebody needs to take it, clean it, import it, run the analysis, which is also something that we have been doing for many years for performance-driven design. So kind of diminishing that cycle to kind of from days or weeks to seconds, and having that real-time feedback is essential. And these interoperability tools absolutely help us through that. Now, there are the interoperability tools out there, but I would say that this conversation is going to shift, and it's going to shift considerably, because most software now, seeing where we're going with agentic AI, if they're clever, they're building whatever they do based on an API-first approach, where you're not even needing to do this import-export nonsense. All you need to do is have agents that can tap into the different software through these open API approaches and go and tie these things together as and if they need to. And so this is where I think we're heading. Okay. So that entire question that consumed the industry for decades is going to be compressed to agentic workflows, and only the software who understand that and provide open API access will be able to, I think, move on.
So as you mentioned, vendors aren't answering always the call on that. So are you seeing some of the, I suppose, new digital tools, new vendors that are coming onto the market, starting to build more this way to disrupt it? Or
how am I saying new digital tools? You're in that industry. Like there's a digital tool every single second.
Yeah, every week.
Right? And I think it's not a matter if you're seeing digital tools. What matters is what it is exactly that they're offering, right? A lot of them are horizontal services that are wrappers in existing kind of AI models, which, if I'm being honest, in 3 years' time or even less, anybody will be able to do it. You can now give Claude Code to somebody who's never programmed before, and they will deliver something. Yeah. Probably badly to begin with, but they will deliver something, right? And I think there is a very interesting growth in the types of tools. I think because of the excitement around certain things like diffusion models, for example, you see a million different software that can create images for you and so on and so forth. But there's going to be quickly a shift, I feel, and you're seeing that already, we're seeing that already, where you're going from these horizontal services to vertical services. Mm-hmm. And at some point, there's going to be, and already exists, a lot of software that are going from conception to operation directly through configurators on particular verticals, particular typologies, and even in particular locations if they want to tap in certain supply chains. And there is going to be a very interesting discussion and situation when that becomes the norm and bifurcation of the market.
Yeah, I mean, so I speak to a lot of firms around digital tools, and they call themselves digital tools. They're using more advanced software or BIM workflows. From your perspective, what is the difference between using digital tools and actually working computationally?
You're asking, I don't think there is a difference. What do you mean? I mean, people are more digitally savvy than others. I think everybody wants to have like these weird notions of themselves. Oh, I'm a computational designer, right? And so they want to make that differentiation.
Okay.
I think modesty is important there. we're talking about expertise that is going to become more and more common. Again, that commoditization comes for everybody. And so at that point, it's all about how quickly can you integrate new tools and new processes within your pipeline.
So I suppose when I say computation, I think what I'm talking about is sort of around the mindset of logic, systems, relationships, feedback loops, and structured problem solving. How do you use tools to create that loop to help you design?
Well, I will give you an example of how we were thinking about this 20 years ago and how we progressed.
Yeah.
So 20 years ago, we're thinking exactly what I told you before, right? You have a design. You want to check it against different objectives. You need to create the design, save it, export it, send it to 5 different consultants to run analysis. By the time the analysis came back, like a week, 10 days passed, if it came back, at which point the design had moved on. And all you had was a very interesting report that wasn't really feeding back on the design, right? Because we, as Foster partners, we create like tens of options every day. And so you relied quite a lot on the experience of the designers and consultants. Now, how do you ensure that that feedback loop becomes real time? And how do you ensure that by doing that, you're also starting enhancing the intuition of more junior members? So it was at that point that we started looking into how do we do real-time analysis. And back then, that's 18 years ago, for example, I wrote a tool for insolation daylight analysis that at the time people used Ecotech. I don't know if you remember it. And then it took like a day to run an analysis or a few hours. And I was speaking headlessly directly to readings through MicroStation. And I could do it in real time for a building. And I could do it within 15 minutes for an entire city. And that was really, and that was across different types of simulations. Then we started building interfaces through processing or JavaScript that allowed people to not only change the designs in real time, but analyze them in real time. And then we took the same interfaces and we did it with physical models where they were captured with cameras from the top, recreated through depth maps the model, and were analyzed and projecting the analysis again in real time. And then game engines came along, and then we did that through game engines and headsets and interactive applications where you can do that through optioneering, and you can then push that into an optimization, and you can even get the report back with the Pareto front, all your kind of objectives, etc., like literally within a few hours. And so this is a little bit of a development of how we have been thinking about performance-driven design and building a process that is not about technology. The process is always about how can I do better design? How can I facilitate the best designers in the world to do what they do in an informed way? And how can I help them as they do these things to also build the intuition they need that would otherwise may take them years? If you have a tool where every time you make a change, you see in real time how well it performs in terms of daylight, structural analysis, whatever, you start understanding what are the changes that you're making that affect it positively or negatively. When then you're getting an optimization, when you run hundreds of thousands of options with 9 objectives in 10 hours, and then you can see that on a city scale, and then you can start from optimal results or results that at least hit your objectives, that is a different conversation than starting from zero, right? It's not about technology for technology's sake. It's about using the best tools available and making them available to a design team in a way that doesn't seem difficult or intrusive for them to do their job better.
And how important, because as you mentioned around the tools there and the outcomes of tools, how important is to have a ingestion of data and understanding and rationalization, so actually feeding these tools to help with those prompts, to help with those different design decisions? Because it's one of the complexity when we talked about interoperability as well, these disparity of systems and understanding how to build that network. I mean, it's a complex environment to build to ensure that you're getting the right outputs and right design metrics.
The discussion is shifting considerably, right? It was down to let's build schemas that can also have semantic information in relation to what we're doing, and these schemas can work across different software and different disciplines. And now the entire question is, what is the data we have? How good is that data? How we can collect that data on one hand, but also how can we author data in an automatic way that allows us to completely ingest it in AI or machine learning pipelines and cross-referencing across different data sets and across different disciplines. So there is a shift, right? And of course, you can say, yeah, put everything in a data lake and let the system sort it out, which is the same as saying, oh, I'll have like an MCP and I'll ask my agent to go and check that entire API to create anything. And of course, if you have that entire toolbox, it becomes very, very difficult to do anything. But at the point where you really organize about your data and you have a data strategy in terms of data inputs and data outputs, how they're authored and how they're cross-referenced, you can very explicitly go and tap in particular data sources and do that job much easier for your agent and for yourself and reinvent your workflows in ways that are not as easy as when you say, well, go and guesswork what you need to do, my AI agent to help me do that. Does this answer make sense?
Yes, yeah. You talked at the beginning a little bit about this as well as around design analysis and delivery, where you've come to bridge the gap of these being separate. But are you still seeing them as separate stages, or are people now understanding it as a continuous process? Now, I would say on two parts. Foster & Partners is probably more advanced in connecting these, but what are you seeing as well across the industry?
I personally never saw them as separate stages. All that I saw was that the existing pipelines and existing technology was not there to allow them to work in tandem as they should, and we built the tools to do that. And of course, you will allow me to say that we were on the forefront of that. And I know a lot of other firms and people who are doing exceptional things as well.
Yep.
This becomes more and more, I don't want to say the norm, but it becomes something that is much more tangible for a lot of people nowadays. And a lot of technologies that exist out there, like whatever you can do with GPU computing, optics, and analysis that used to, like we can now throw millions of rays in real time, for example, and analyze views or sunlight in a tower in New York with the entire New York context in real time as we're changing the building. That is only available because GPU computing made it so, right? So now, because of these technology facilitations, a lot of software vendors, but also companies who have groups similar to the applied R&D, can do some of these things much easier. And again, I feel that if we have this discussion in 2-3 years' time, it's going to be even more different, because then we currently have to think very carefully about how we're creating the back-end architecture, where we need to develop things, what is the front end, how we tie it with current design software. And I think through agentic AI, this discussion will completely shift in the next 3 years.
So on that comment there is that, it's working. It'll be interesting for your view about where it's working well today, and when does it reach limitations and it breaks and actually has an effect on the process, on this continuous process?
What exactly breaks? You can break anything. I mean, the easiest thing is to ask somebody to break up a process.
Yeah, I would say, so just reading some of my notes here is that, a continuous process is powerful, but in practice, projects still evolve a lot around discipline, tools, consultants, and delivery pressures.
Absolutely.
And that consultancy, that continuous process, although theoretically and adopted well at some practices, seems to break in things like joint ventures or certain dictated by tools or by clients. That these are sort of things that I'm hearing in a sense. So that's where I mean by that continuous process.
I think I cannot put a blanket statement for the entire industry. Of course, I know how we work in the office. All I can say is that all the things you're saying are very possible in any sort of project, anywhere. I think it does. A lot of the things that you're mentioning are not only related to technology itself. They're related to culture and people. Because a lot of the times, and that is something that I feel people within technology like us like talking about technology and the opportunities that it gives, and we're pushing it forward as the one shiny thing that is going to solve everything, and if you cannot do it, it means that you don't know technology. And I think the problem comes from the other side. I think the problem comes from the fact that we are creating technological solutions that people cannot easily adapt to, and that's why AI has been picking up so much, because the adaptation needs to be very little. And I think there is also a cultural thing, because people tend to do things the way they want to do things within their comfort zone.
Yeah.
And the moment you ask them to go outside that comfort zone, unless you provide a lot of pillows for them to fall over, they're very unwilling to do that. So there is a cultural change that needs to come from the top in any sort of situations like that, which is not something that many people think, not certainly technology people think. And then there is the financial aspect, right? A lot of, and again, I don't want to generalize, but I will say, okay, a consultant is being brought in any project, not for some partners, I'm talking generally, to do a job with a particular fee, right? And that fee becomes cut. And they say the only amount of time that we have to work on that for that fee is that amount. And so in many cases, not that there is the technology or the workflow doesn't allow you to like have this continuous optimization, is that, you know, their fee or the time that they book in a project cannot support it. So that is to say that there are a lot of different reasons why this breaks up. And we shouldn't be pointing it to technology or the fact that technology is not properly adapted. And we need to be thinking about this holistically.
Yeah.
And the first people we should be thinking about is ourselves. People who provide technology facilitation, innovation to creative people. Are we doing this in a way that feels as easy as breathing? Are we helping them within something that they feel comfortable to be more creative and create more in a more continuous way? And I don't think that is a question most people within this spectrum are asking themselves.
And that leads on to, I suppose, the role of an architect is changing. They are becoming more technologists. They sort of have to. The way I see it in the next 5-10 years, you know, the role of the architect is changing. How do you support that culture on a culture that potentially doesn't want to change, potentially want to protect their role as an architect? And I know we've talked a lot about this on the podcast, but as you said, the adoption of AI, the adoption of technology is going to continue to grow. Are you going to have much of a choice as an architect not to develop and change?
I will go back to you with a question on that.
Yeah.
So back in the day, you and I needed to learn an array of different software. How long did it take you to learn a software in order to be able to use it?
A couple of months, maybe.
Couple of months?
Yeah.
Well, I was the queen of MicroStation, and it took me a good 6 months to a year to know everything I need to know for that software to be able to perform at the level that I could perform 20 years ago.
I think you were learning harder software than me. Yeah. But yeah.
And this is the type of software that architects needed to learn and to finesse what they could do in something like MicroStation, Revit, Photoshop, Max. You require to put a lot of time and a lot of effort.
Absolutely.
Do you think that the new software that are being developed, particularly through AI facilitation, require that level of engagement? The learning curve is completely different. So when you say that architecture is changing and everybody needs to become a technologist, I do not agree. Quite the opposite. I feel that a lot of this, do you need to be able to be agile and adapt to new processes? Absolutely. Do you need to go and learn hardcore software in the same way that you used to do 20 years ago or even 10 years ago? I would say absolutely not. And so there is a fine balance there, right? Is the balance between learning a software and honing your skill and being best you can on something that you're used day in and day out, or being able to adapt quickly to different workflows on software that you don't necessarily need to spend a year or 6 months to learn, but that can facilitate you. And so being able to change the different software and the different pipelines to help you do what you need to do faster. That then needs a facilitation from people like us on the back end to ensure that these pipelines can adapt very quickly, can change very quickly, that the financials work for the entire company, and that things can move on fast and decision-making can be happening fast. So I do not agree that an architect needs to become a technologist. I think architects, what they need to do is they need to hone their skill and understand what their value is in the design process, need to be able to be open-minded and adapt quickly, and understand where they're shifting. If you think that you have a bifurcating market, where you're going to have the vertical configurators, automation at scale on one side, and you're going to have the bespoke service of that kind of drives the premium on the other side, and you have a squeezed middle where maybe you have new roles that have to do with new expertise, new things that we don't even know exist. Where in that spectrum do you need to be? And what are the value kind of proposition that you put in yourself in order to convince your client to hire you.
What great advice. That's the best answer I've heard on that.
It's not advice. I
change.
hate giving advice. Each person should give advice to themselves. All I'm telling you is what I see, and I'm not a medium. I can't predict the future. I'm only saying these things based on some educated guesses on things that I'm seeing happening, right?
Well, we talked about, I suppose off cameras, murmurings and talks about the change, and some concern, some not concerned. But I suppose that answers a little bit around a mindset approach of considering where you fit and play, and your role as an architect, right? I would say. So.
Absolutely. I mean, again, what is your value proposition? All the things that drove architectural education are going to be erased. Kind of automatic creation of drawings is coming. A lot of things within conceptual design is coming, like image making, movie making, detailed design, kind of cross-referencing of ideas. A lot of the things that architects were trained to do are going to be automated, or we're going to have provisions through software or agents that we can do these things much faster. At that point, where you're eliminating the training ground of every single architect that existed, it becomes an existential question that we need to answer now of what it is exactly that you're training for, and therefore what is the value proposition for the client. How you even calculate fees, right? If fees have been relying to resourcing because they're relying on people and they're relying on time, when AI comes and compresses time and number of people required to create something, if you still have a value proposition that relies on that resourcing model, then you're going to have big issues with your fees in 5 years' time.
Absolutely.
So again, rethinking that balance and understanding what it is that you're offering is fundamental. The point is not to ask kind of a software to provide an answer to something, whether it's an LLM or a diffusion model, and trying to guess whether it's right or not. The problem becomes, do I know what is the right answer to ask? Am I in a level understanding all the different the situation within the project with the client, with the designers, and where the problem needs to go? Do I understand like what is said between the lines and what are the things that I need to push? Do I understand what are the objectives that are important for this project? And whatever at the end I'm signing off, am I ready to take the liability of whatever I'm producing? These are becoming the big issues, along with the idea of pivoting and being able to pivot to different services that we're going to see more and more, because technology will facilitate a lot of things that currently are very specialized and niche things.
Totally agree. Now, with the advancement of technology, there's a lot that's, and we talked about how many things are being released every single day or week or month, right? There's a lot of things that sit between, especially in your role of, research and development, there's a lot that sits between experimentation, real project delivery. So it'd be quite interesting to hear how you start deciding which ideas are worth developing into real project workflows and which should sort of remain exploratory. If you're allowed to, you could share what Foster and Partners are focusing on. If you're not, then it'd be great just to get a blanket view. I mean,
right now my team is focusing on so many different areas, right? Because you cannot focus on one thing at any given time. That's not the world we're living in.
Absolutely.
But what I would say is, like, everybody keeps telling me, oh, you're doing R&D. And they're missing the important piece of the title of the group, which is applied R&D. And the applied comes from the fact that is there blue skies research of some research that we're seeing is coming and we want to develop it? Absolutely. That's how we started with AI in 2018, knowing where things are going to head. That's how we're doing a lot of other things in the office. But that is not the majority. The majority is us working directly with studios and facilitating them in different things and understanding through the process what are the things that are missing and trying to think strategically how we can solve the overall problem, not just kind of solve one particular problem for one particular team. And then it's about understanding not just what happens within the industry, but what technologies exist outside the industry and how these technologies can help us fast track what we do. A lot of the technologies that my group is using are not coming from the AEC. They came from gaming industry, they came from movies industry, they came from computer science fields where we've seen how people were doing things and we thought, oh wow, this is going to be super interesting for us. like GPU computing that I mentioned, or distributed computing. These all started because people wanted to have better gaming experiences, or people wanted to have like real-time feedback in movies when they had the kind of visual effects.
Yeah.
And we were seeing these things in SIGGRAPH 15 plus years ago, and we thought, well, if you take that level of parallelization or fast computation and you change it from a visualization problem, how do I run faster rendering, to a simulation problem, you can suddenly have real-time analysis. Oh, okay, well, why don't we just try that, given that we know a lot of people want these types of analysis, and the reason why they cannot use it on a daily basis is because it takes so long to run. So these are the sort of connections that you need to be making. And then you need to start thinking at much wider things. For example, one of the things, I'm not going to go in all of the things, but one of the things we're thinking about now is robotics, right? And it's not about robotics per se. You may or may not know, we have been the only architectural firm that were part of the early adopters program for SPOT. I met Boston Dynamics in a conference how many years back, before COVID, and we're like, this is incredible. And if we had a doc like that, this and this is what we would do. And before they took it to market, they contacted us and they said, you seem like the exact right people to be in that program. Would you like to trial it? And we did for 3 months, because we had a plan, a business plan of what we want to do. And then they left it with us for more than a year and a half, because we're giving them so good feedback for their updates. But we saw something and we knew how we're going to use it. But beyond that, the way I'm thinking of robotics is, especially with robots, and as it was with immersive experiences, augmented and virtual reality, the ideas and the software were always ahead of where the hardware was.
Right.
What happens now with AI is that it facilitates the development of a lot of the hardware in relation to all the data and the knowledge we have. So I'm seeing a lot of the hardware being fast-tracked. When that happens, you're going to very quickly start having situations where you have human-robot interaction into built spaces. What does that mean? What does that mean for design? What is the blueprint for designing for a human-robot interaction space? What is the blueprint for a building that requires robot to move? For example, 90-degree corners are not as easy to navigate. When they need to go from one floor to another, how do they do that if they are not quadrupeds or they they're on wheels? If they need to charge, where do they charge? If they need to basically cater for different needs, what are the logistics for that?
Wow.
And even more importantly, what happens when you and a robot are walking on the same corridor together, when there is no boundary condition? And that boundary condition is eliminated by a coexistence model. And we've heard in the past from back then Kiva and then Amazon Robotics, for example, that when they were doing research and they were saying that humans would bully robots. They will sit in front of them, not let them pass. So how do you start redefining those ideas of what it means to design for such a cohabitation? These are huge subjects, especially if you start looking into them in niches like hospitals, airports, academic and research facilities. And so these are the things that myself and my team are thinking about the future. And these are the type of discussions that we're having, along with the discussions of, well, we need to do a performance analysis and investigation on that small city-scale project against 10 criteria by tomorrow. Can we do that, please?
Wow. That's got me... it's just got me thinking a bit about a decision tree. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a second, because you mentioned robotics, you mentioned AI in 2018. You look at things and you're looking at... well, you're almost looking ahead. If you look, we need to think about that now for the future, as you mentioned around robotics. You then have Elon Musk that is looking to produce the sort of Tesla bot that's going to be walking around these places, these co-inhabited places, and all these different things. Out of interest, how much do external factors, the things you're looking at, do you have a framework that you follow, or decision tree? When I say decision tree, in the infrastructure world, we talk around decision trees of this should sit there, that should sit there, based on certain workloads and work streams in an IT world. How do you guys get to a decision on what you should be focusing on? Why it's important to continue in terms of applied research and development in a sense, a bit like robotics. So you just talked about a very futuristic version there of we have to look at co-inhabitation of robots, people. How do you design for that? How do you make the decision on, well, early, is this the right thing to focus on as a team? Which might be $1 million question, right? But it's a hard one.
Well, we've been lucky. I don't know. I think it comes from a position of experience, I would say, and support. The one thing to say is that our office fully supports this type of endeavors, and having a board who are really understanding the value of this and how this is as important as doing the design that we do in order to be in the forefront of what we do within the industry, really creates an environment where innovation can blossom, right? And so that gives us a lot of reassurance and strength in what we do, because they wouldn't trust us if the decisions that we were making were not the right decisions. Now, I think it's all a matter of timing, technology, available projects where we can test certain things, and appetite. And all these different components need to work together. And so I will tell you that over time, I had ideas about different things that we could be doing. I was discussing with the team, and we were like, this is great, but this is not the right time potentially to do it. And then at some point, you know that the stars aligned because, well, a technology came in that makes that super easy, or a project comes in, or you're talking with a designer who's really keen to test that, or all these things together.
So you see a use case that drives that initiative. Okay.
Yeah, but it's not just a use case, but also for us, it's not a matter of doing something that is interesting that I can put in a paper and say, look how great we are.
No.
I actually have very little interest in that. That's why I don't have any social media. I don't care to say what I do or like how great we are.
Yeah.
What I care is that we facilitate like our designers to do fantastic architecture. And so it all comes down to how not only you can do a certain thing that is interesting, but how can you scale it up with financially good terms across a company of 2,500 people, and we are right now. Bearing in mind that my team is usually 1 to 1.5% of the total size of the company, so I have very few people to be able to try and deploy and deliver a lot of these things. And so we need to be like fast-tracking things like there's no tomorrow and do multiple things at the same time. And so it is a matter of like great technology and great opportunity, but it's also a matter of like, can I do this and scale it up so the entire team, the entire office can use it in a way that it's financially viable? And these are all things that you need to consider in this case.
Yeah.
It's very different to operate for a 10, 20, 100 people company. It's very different to operate for 2,500 people.
And a lot of people, I've been finding about a 100-person company, and we talked about AI adoption and things like that. A lot of them stay in test phase, and I've talked about. I speak to a lot of companies that are still playing, but they stay in a test phase. And when I talk about getting to BAU, it means that your whole office has been able to use it. How do you get to that adoption framework? How do you apply that from your team of understanding it and then getting offices to use it?
So the way that we're usually developing anything nowadays is very much as if we are a software shop. So what we will do is if we decide that something is a good idea for all the reasons I mentioned before, we will start building sort of an architecture for the backend and the front end, what we think we need to deliver. But then we will go and address the issue with the people who are going to use it. So we're going to do customer discovery across the office. And sometimes we do customer discovery also outside the office, as we did with Cyclops that we made publicly available for free. And based on the customer discovery, we do not assume that we know the solution. Sometimes the problem that you think you're solving is not the actual problem, and there are other issues that you need to address before you actually solve the problem that people need to have. Well, in some cases also, you give people what they need and not what they want. But and so we do that, and then we start building an MVP, a minimum viable product. We will have an alpha testing of the MVP amongst ourselves and with a smaller group of people to understand how easy it is, whether we need to make updates on the interface, and also costs, especially when you have to deal with tokenization nowadays and like paying costs with APIs and all that. And when we have a better understanding of the cost that this will incur and like the things that we need to change, we make available in a larger kind of test group, and then we make available office-wide. And that's why the software that we build and solutions that we build have to comply to very strict security requirements for anything you can imagine. So that is the way that we're going from test to business as usual. But we're not going to invest too much on things that we're just playing around with. I know that there is a lot of people in the industry within the domain that I operate that love technology and love to challenge themselves, and in many cases love to reinvent the wheel just to be able to say that they did it themselves. And I think personally that is not good use of my or my team's time, and we need to be able to be operational and delivering things that kind of augment the value in the IP that the company has and takes us to the next 10 years like easily.
And how does your, just out of interest, I mean, speak across quite a few practices. Some practices are very much a bottom-up approach. They take a lot of testing, a lot of inspiration from the architectural level, so the end users or your customers in a sense, in terms of your own users. And some are very much top-down. These are business-driven. This is what we need to look at. Is Foster Partners got a particular approach, or do you guys have a particular approach of where you take the drive for what you're looking at?
I think it has to go both ways.
Okay.
I think you need to have a guidance and a remit that comes top down if you are able to deploy things office-wide and make people kind of understand that this is a strategic decision that applies to everybody. But I think you cannot deliver tools that are going to be adopted in that way unless you go bottom up and you understand exactly what people need exactly when they need them. And so it needs to go both ways. And I think if you go one way or another, you're missing something in the translation there.
Brilliant. So I want to go back to a bit about some of the complex projects you've worked on. I've got some here in the notes. This is the new International Airport, Mexico City, Queen Alia International Airport, and the Zayed National Museum. I'm quite interested around when we talk about our digital systems and how they're used well on projects at scale. What do they change most? And I'm talking about this continual process. What have you seen from an output from speed, quality, coordination, performance, or ambition or design itself? Where are you seeing the biggest output when you're starting to get feedback, the continuous loops, the right digital tools all integrated together? Or all of the above?
Yeah, I mean, in most of these projects that you mentioned, there was that from beginning to end because we're integrating the team quite early on, and we worked throughout. Some of them are delivery projects, and that some of them never got finished. Like Mexico City Airport never got finished, which was the one that got away really. But the reality is that you start creating processes that can much faster take you from A to B and allow for much more investigation and creative optioneering as you go along down a certain route. Also, it allows you to make clever decisions early on in the design process and avoid a situation where further down the line you realize that something's horribly wrong. And at that point, making the change is financially and creatively not that viable. And so these are the sort of things that you're avoiding. And I know a lot of people are talking about the decision making, how the early process changes. And I know it's the sort of thing that everybody says, but it's actually very true. And so you see a lot of these things working really well. I'm very lucky because I work in a company where I think most projects work like that. So in most projects, we see that level of attention to performance-driven design optimization. So I cannot say that, I've seen it when I work, and the other projects that I haven't worked, I don't see it. I mean, it's everywhere, and I'm very happy that a lot of these teams are using tools that we have provided or tools that existed and commercially available to deliver these results based on these processes.
On performance data-driven design, how does performance data change the way design decisions are made? Especially when there's competing priorities like structure, environment, cost, user experience, buildability.
I mean, that's why I said that comes down to understanding what your priorities are. So if, let's say you want to do performance-driven design against 9 objectives. I'm now thinking of particular project. 9 objectives, huge project. What do you do? Okay, let's run optimization against these 9 objectives. We have simulation engines that are allowed to do that very quickly, like Cyclops. We have our own distributed computing and optimization engine called Hydra that allows us to run tens of thousands of options with 10 different objectives, let's say, overnight. And next morning, we have a solution space of these tens of thousands of options with the 100 best and all the objectives in a web app to understand and visualize. And we can select the ones that we want, click a report, send a report, and send the different generative massing. And then the architects can start working from this. And they know, okay, what do we learn from that? We say, if daylight is the most important objective for you, maybe you want to be tailored closer to this solution where the towers are taller on the back and you do this and you do that. If like return of investment is more important in relation to views, then you want to do this and this and that. And so this becomes an initial driver, not as this is the solution that you should get. Again, this is about a designer who just starts and is able directly within a night to understand within the solution space which types of moves are going to take them closer to one solution or the other. But then the interesting part on that becomes exactly what we were saying before about the value of an architect. We can run optimization, I'm quite sure. A lot of other people can run optimizations. What are you optimizing against? What is the design DNA that you build your parametric model on that the designers want to kind of explore? These are questions that the computer can't necessarily answer, right? And what do you understand your client needs and how can you guide them in particular areas to facilitate their decision making? Being a very sustainable office in many ways, how can we showcase that you need to make very few moves to drop embodied carbon for what you're trying to do or have a solution that is more sustainable without you jeopardizing financial costs? And so these are the type of things that are really interesting and drive the conversation forward. The technology and how you get there are side steps in a way that just make this discussion possible.
I know we talked off camera. How do you keep up with all of this? How do you keep up with the technology roadmap? Because a lot of architects are struggling to keep with the pace. Many practices are hard to keep the pace. How do you keep up?
Practice makes perfect. No, I'm joking. I think when you say you keep up, people may perceive that as a personal how I keep up. And I would say it's a plural how you keep up because I have an incredible team behind me and I always hire people. I try to hire people who are better than me, right? And so we're all having our ears and eyes open and we're all talking together and trying to like read the tea leaves in where the future lies. And we all have a very, for us, if the team does well, we all do well, the entire office does well. So it's not we're not lone wolves. We're kind of sitting together and we're discussing what best opportunities are. I cannot be reading everything that is out there. Nobody can. But if you have 35 people, all of whom are keen on understanding where things are going and they're bringing different ideas on the table and they're cross-fertilizing amongst other people who have the same interest, great things happen, right? So I think it's a matter of really trying to understand that this is not a unitary game. Architecture has always been a team game. And I think when you're looking into the future, is it important to have a vision and a strategy? Absolutely. And I hope that I can bring that on the table. But it's equally important to have extremely talented people around you and to not just be able to know the things you know, but be more able to know the things you don't know and to trust and rely the people who you selected to work with you and they selected to work with you to move forward to the future together and think of new great things to do.
Well, to sort of start to end the podcast because our time's flown, which has been great. We talk about the future, so I wanted to end with a final question because, you mentioned you also teach at UCL and you work for sort of the next generation of designers. If we fast forward 10 years, do you think architecture will still be recognised as a design discipline in the way we understand it today, or will it fundamentally evolve into something else?
I think it should. I think it would be a waste if it didn't. And I think it's up to us to make sure it does. I'm the sort of person who thinks that our future is in our hands to shape the way we want to shape, right? So if we're seeing where things are going, it's up to us to ensure that we make the change we want to see and we want to be part of. So I don't think this... is this a possibility? Of course, everything is possible and even more probable these days. But I think it's also important to understand that the way technology operates right now could mean that this is our photography moment. And I give that example a lot because when photography came out, a lot of people thought that this is going to be the death of art. And so what happened is that artists stopped competing with photography because they couldn't create the exact portrait that is exactly the same way as a photograph would. But then they start kind of inventing new things like cubism and expressionism. And all these new waves of creativity and styles came from this idea that, okay, that style is done and technology can provide that. What's next for us? How can we be more creative in ways we didn't think before? And I think there is a great opportunity for us to understand how we can seize that moment to make that sort of leap for our profession where we want to be in 10 years' time.
That's really good. Look, it's been great having you on the podcast. Thank you very much for your insights. Thank you very much for understanding the future. I'm now my mind blown around considering how buildings are going to be built for cohabited robots, which is something I'm going to take away.
That was one of the things.
I know, yeah.
And I haven't even told you the more interesting stuff.
Well, we'll have to have you back on. I mean, I could speak to you for another hour about all the interesting extra things, but thank you very much. And look, we'll have you back on. And thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, and I hope it was interesting.
It was very. So thank you.
Thanks.
What this conversation really highlights is that the challenge facing architecture isn't just about tools or even technology more broadly. It's about the pipeline, how ideas move, how decisions are made, and how information flows from design through to analysis into delivery and ultimately into what gets built. And as Martha's described, many of the challenges we still see today don't come from a lack of capability, they come from how the pipeline is structured, where it breaks, where it becomes fragmented, and where the connection between intent and outcome is lost. Reinventing the pipeline isn't just about making things faster or more efficient, it's about creating a more continuous, more informed, and more connected way of working. One where design, data, and delivery are not separate stages, but part of the same system. And within that, the role of the architect becomes even more important, not just as a designer of form, but as someone who understands, navigates, and ultimately shapes that system. Well, thanks to Martha for a conversation that challenges how we think about architecture at its core. This is the AEC Innovators Circle Podcast, where we explore the ideas shaping the future of architecture, engineering, and construction. If you found this episode valuable, follow, share it with your network, and join us for the next conversation. Until next time.